The contact came in at the edge of the grid, and Nethvari almost missed it. He was 3 hours into a shift that had no business being interesting. The board in front of him showed the usual things: freight lanes, 2 mining tenders, a weather buoy that had been drifting off station for a decade, and that nobody had ever bothered to retrieve. Then a single point of light bloomed at the far margin of the display, cold and steady, moving in a straight line toward the flagship. He watched it for a moment before he spoke. That was his habit, and it had never once gotten him in trouble. "Contact," he said. "Bearing high, closing, 1 vessel." Fleet Master Dukov Oro did not turn around. He was standing at the rail above the command pit with his hands folded behind him, the way he always stood, and he had the look of a man who found the whole thing beneath him. "1," Dukov Oro said. "Send the greeting." Nethvari sent it. The standard packet. Peace, trade terms, the seal of the Galactic Dominion, all of it wrapped in the frequencies any civilized species would recognize and answer inside a heartbeat. The vessel did not answer. It did not slow. It did not turn. It came on at the same flat speed, dead straight, and the silence where the reply should have been made the hair rise along the back of Nethvari's neck. Then the vessel spoke. Not the greeting. Not any protocol he knew. Just a voice. Human. Calm. Pitched like a man reading a number off a page. "Start the clock," it said. And somewhere on that ship, Nethvari would learn much later, someone did. Dukov Oro laughed. It was a short sound, more breath than humor, and it filled the command deck the way his laugh always did. Because when a fleet master laughed, the officers around him were expected to relax. "They send 1 ship," he said, "and they talk to themselves. Log it. A traitor who has lost his nerve, or a lunatic. Either way, a small thing." Nethvari logged it, but he kept the vessel on his board, in the corner, small and bright, and he did not take his eyes off it for long. He had reason to know the shape of small things that did not stay small. His grandmother had died in one. A border skirmish that the reports had called minor, a rounding error in a war nobody remembered the name of now. He had grown up with her chair still at the table and no one sitting in it, so he distrusted the word small. It was a word people used right up until the moment it stopped being true. The vessel held its course, far behind the flagship, in a chamber that smelled of polished stone and old incense. The High Regent of the Galactic Dominion was being told about the contact for the first time, and she was already bored by it. Sethravol sat at the head of a table older than most of the worlds under her rule. She had governed for a long time, long enough to know that the surest way to keep a frightened council calm was to refuse to be frightened first, and to say so out loud until it became true. "A single unregistered vessel," she said when the report finished. "Refusing contact. Approaching a flagship it cannot possibly threaten." She let the silence hold for a beat. "This remains a routine matter. We will not dignify it with alarm." Around the table, the ministers nodded. They wanted to nod. It cost them nothing, and it let them go home to dinner. Only one of them did not. Lomar the Grey had served 4 regents before this one, and he had the tired patience of a man who has been right too many times to enjoy it. He rose slowly, and the room quieted, because even the ones who despised him were curious what he would find to disapprove of now. "You know which species built that ship," he said. "We suspect," Sethravol answered. "You know." Lomar looked around the table, at the soft faces, at the good silver, at the incense curling up toward a ceiling painted with victories that were mostly exaggerated. "I have read what little we have on them. Not their fleets, their letters. When one of them dies, the others write to the dead. For years, they keep the names. They do not forgive a debt, and they do not forget one, and they do not measure themselves the way we measure ourselves." He paused. "I have said this before. I will say it once more, and then I will sit down and be an old fool for you. Do not touch that species. Whatever we have already done, do not do more." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, someone at the far end of the table laughed, the way Dukov Oro had laughed, and the sound spread, and Lomar the Grey sat down and folded his hands and said nothing else. He had known how it would go. He always did. "This remains a routine matter," Seth Raval said again, gently, as if to a child. "Thank you, Lomar." On the command deck, Nethvari heard the ship speak a second time. It was not the greeting, and it was not aimed at them. It was a single word in the human tongue, in that same flat reading voice. 41, it said. Nethvari ran it through every filter he had, a designation, a coordinate, a countdown, maybe. He cross-checked it against the vessel's speed and heading and found nothing that fit. It was a number, spoken plainly into the dark, and it meant nothing to him. And that was somehow worse than a threat would have been. He marked the time. He wrote it down. 41. He did not know yet that he would spend the rest of the campaign listening to that voice climb. A great distance away, aboard the ship the Kavash did not have a name for, a man named Thomas Vega read the number off his own board and glanced across the bridge at his captain. The room he sat in was smaller than the Kavash flagship's command deck, and quieter, and it did not smell of incense. It smelled of coffee that had gone cold in a cup somebody had forgotten. On the wall behind the captain's chair, there was a whiteboard with a stain in one corner where a marker had bled through years ago and never come out. Nobody had cleaned it. Nobody would. Captain Otta Cole stood at the front of the bridge with her hands loose at her sides, watching the Kavash flagship grow slowly larger on the display, and she did not raise her voice, because she never did. "They sent the greeting," Vega said. "I heard." Cole did not turn. "Log it. Don't answer it. They think we came to talk." "I know what they think." She was quiet a moment. "How's the list?" Vega looked at the screen in front of him. There was a name attached to every number, and he had read all of them more than once. And the reading did not get easier. 41, Captain, he said. Cole nodded slowly. On her own board, in a corner where the flag officers did not usually look, there was a face, an old man in a gray coat, 61 years of age, with dirt under his fingernails and a stubborn set to his jaw. Dr. Ivo Wren, 40 years a botanist and a physician, keeper of a seed vault and a children's clinic on a quiet station at the rim called Halden Reach. He was not on the ship. He was not anywhere they could reach him. That was the whole problem, and Cole did not let herself look at the face for long, because there was work to do and looking would not help him. "Steady on," she said. "Don't slow. Don't turn. Let them watch us come." "They'll figure it out eventually," Vega said. "Not yet." Cole finally turned, and there was nothing cruel in her face, and nothing kind either, only a great and level patience. "Right now they think this is routine. Let them keep thinking that a little while longer." On the Kavash command deck, Nethvari watched the small bright point that would not answer and would not stop, and he felt the cold thing in his stomach get a little colder. The vessel did not slow. It did not turn. It was still coming. They tried to find out what the ship was before they tried to stop it. That was the sensible order, and it was the last sensible thing the Galactic Dominion did for a long while. Nethvari ran the vessel against the records, all of them. The trade registries, the war archives, the old survey logs from before the Dominion had a name, the captured databases of a dozen species they had folded into the empire over the centuries. He was thorough. He had always been thorough. And now he had a reason to be, because the cold thing in his stomach had not gone away. The records gave him nothing, not a partial match, not a similar hull profile flagged in some forgotten skirmish, nothing. The ship on his board did not exist anywhere the Kavash had ever looked, and the Kavash had looked almost everywhere. He checked it 3 times, because a man does not like to stand up in front of a fleet master and say the word nothing. "Report," Dukavoro said. "It isn't in our records," Nethvari said. "Any of them. No profile, no registry, no prior contact. As far as our archives are concerned, that ship has never been seen." Dukavoro considered this the way a man considers a stain on his sleeve. "Then it is new," he said. "New and alone and foolish. Get me the assessment on their homeworld. If they have decided to send us a ship, I want to know how many more they can afford to lose." The assessment came up from intelligence within the hour, and it was reassuring, which was the problem with it. The analysts had done their work the way analysts always did. They had counted shipyards they could see. They had counted hulls in the open. They had taken the visible and called it the total, because the visible was all they had, and a number on a slide is easier to defend than an admission of ignorance. The number they produced was 40, roughly 40 warships, they said, that this human world could field. A small navy, a regional power, at best, punching far above its weight with one clever vessel and a great deal of nerve. Duke of Oro read the number and was satisfied by it. 40, he said, to the deck at large. They have 40, and they have sent us one. This is not a war. This is a gesture. He almost smiled. Very well, let us answer the gesture. He detached a squadron, 9 ships, good ones, crewed by officers who had done this before against species that had folded quickly. Their orders were simple. Intercept the vessel, disable it, and bring back whatever was flying it, alive if possible, for the pleasure of asking it questions. Nethvari watched the 9 ships peel away from the flagship and form up and burn toward the small, bright point that had not slowed and had not turned. He watched them close the distance. He watched them bring their weapons to bear, all of them, a wall of fire aimed at a single hull, and then he watched the single hull do something he did not have a word for. The Meridian did not fire back. That was the part that stayed with him afterward, the part he would try to explain to people who had not been there and would fail to explain. It did not destroy the 9 ships. It took them apart. Cleanly, methodically, with the unhurried economy of a person disassembling a machine, they understood better than the people who built it. Drives went dark. Weapons went cold. Targeting systems simply stopped, one after another, as if a hand had reached inside each ship and switched off the thing that made it dangerous and left everything else alone. 9 ships adrift. Not one of them wrecked. Not one crewman dead. Nethvari checked the readings twice because it did not make sense to him, and it took him a moment to understand why it frightened him more than a slaughter would have. A slaughter he could have understood. A slaughter was what the Kavash did. But this was not rage and it was not desperation. This was a choice. Whatever was on that ship had looked at 9 armed vessels sent to take it, and had decided, deliberately, to let every single crew live. Mercy was not a weakness he knew how to defend against. He did not even know how to report it. They're disabled, he said. All 9. Drives and weapons only. The crews are alive. Duke of Oro turned around at last. Alive? Yes, Fleetmaster. Undamaged. They chose not to kill them. For the first time, something moved behind the Fleetmaster's face. Not fear, not yet. But the beginning of the question that would eventually undo him, the question of why. Why would a thing that could kill decline too? He did not like questions he could not answer, and so he did what such men do, and he pushed it down and reached for certainty. They lack the stomach, he said. Good. A soft enemy is a slow one. But he said it a little too quickly, and Nethvari heard it. Then the ship spoke again. 44, said the flat human voice. Nethvari wrote it down beneath the first one. 41. 44. The number had climbed by 3 in the time it took the vessel to cross a stretch of empty space and unmake 9 ships without killing anyone. He did not know what was being counted. He only knew that it was going up, and that whatever reached the top of it was meant for them. In the chamber that smelled of stone and incense, the council was told that a squadron had been lost, and the High Regent chose her words with care, because the ministers were watching her face to decide how afraid they were allowed to be. Lost is the wrong word, Seth Raval said. The ships are intact. The crews are intact. We have suffered an inconvenience, not a defeat. She folded her hands. A single vessel has disabled 9 of ours and spared the men aboard. This tells us the enemy is capable, but hesitant. Capable we can respect. Hesitant we can exploit. She looked slowly around the table, letting each of them feel included in her calm. This remains a routine matter. We will meet it with discipline, not with fear. The ministers breathed out. It was such a relief to be told that the thing they were afraid of was routine. Lomar the Grey did not breathe out. He sat with his old hands flat on the table and he looked at the High Regent for a long moment. And then he looked away, because he had already said his piece. And a man can only be laughed at so many times in one lifetime. But under the table, his hands were not quite steady, and he was doing a thing he had not done in years. He was counting, quietly, the ways this could end, and he did not like how few of them left the Dominion standing. On the bridge that smelled of cold coffee, Ada Cole watched the 9 Kavash ships drift dark and silent, and did not feel anything she would have called triumph. 9 for 9, Vega said. Crews are alive. They're already calling it in. Good. Cole studied the flagship, still growing on the display. Let them call it in. Let them argue about what it means. They're going to decide we're weak. For a while. She was quiet. That's fine. A thing that thinks you're weak will come close enough to hear you. Vega glanced at her. You want to say something to them? Cole nodded slowly. She had been waiting for this, longer than the campaign, longer than the ship. She thought about the old man in the gray coat, and the seed vault, and the children's clinic on the quiet station at the rim, and the day the reports had come in from Halden Reach, with a list of names attached, and a number at the bottom of the list. She had read the list. She had memorized the list. Every name on it was on the wall of this ship now, one to a line, and Vega read them off in order. One for every ship that fell. Put me through, she said. Their language, their command frequency. I want the officers to hear it, not just the analysts. What do you want to say? Cole was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice did not rise, and that was the thing that made it terrible. One sentence, she said. That's all they've earned so far. On the Kavash command deck, the human ship spoke for the 4th time, and this time it did not speak in numbers, and it did not speak to itself. It spoke in flawless, unhurried Kavash, in a woman's calm voice, and every officer on the deck understood every word. We know what you did at Halden Reach. The command deck went very quiet. Nethvari felt the cold thing in his stomach turn to ice, because he knew that name. Everyone on that deck knew that name. And he understood, all at once, that the ship had not come to talk, and had never come to talk, and that the numbers climbing in the dark were not a countdown to an attack. They were a list of the dead. For 3 days after that, the Kavash Dominion tried to kill the Meridian in earnest, and for 3 days the Meridian let them see exactly how little that mattered. Dukov Oro had stopped laughing by then. He had not started being afraid, not out loud, because a fleet master who shows fear on his own deck is a fleet master who is about to be replaced. But he had stopped laughing, and the officers noticed, the way a crew always notices the small weather of the man in command. He threw a real attack at the ship this time, not a squadron sent to take a prize, a hammer. 40 vessels in a coordinated strike, their weapons calibrated by his best gunnery officers, every shot planned to land in the same instant on the same hull, so that no defense could answer all of it at once. It was a good plan. It was the plan that had broken 3 other species inside the Dominion's memory. The Meridian took the first strike and adapted to it. That was the word Nethvari kept coming back to, because it was the only honest one. The human ship did not simply endure the barrage. It learned it. The first volley found its mark and did real harm, scoring the hull, and Nethvari felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Then the second volley came, aimed the same way, calibrated the same way, and it did almost nothing, because in the space between the first shot and the second, the ship had already changed the way it stood against that exact weapon. By the third volley, the Kavash guns were firing into a defense that had been built specifically to defeat them. Built while they watched, faster than they could retune. It's adapting to the weapons, Nethvari reported, and he heard how thin his own voice sounded. Not just resisting, adapting. Every pattern we use, it answers within a day, sometimes within an hour. Fleetmaster, we cannot hit it the same way twice. Then we will hit it 40 different ways, Dukov Oro said. But the certainty had gone out of the words. He was a man reaching for a tool and finding the drawer empty. Intelligence came back to the deck that same day with a correction, and the correction was worse than the attack. The analysts had been wrong, not a little wrong. The number of warships the human world could field was not 40. It had never been 40. 40 was only what could be seen from the outside, and the humans, it turned out, did not keep much on the outside. When the analysts finally pulled the real figures, cross-checked against captured traffic and the disabled squadron's own sensor logs, the number they brought to Dukov Oro was 206. He stared at the slide for a long time. 206, he said. That is the confirmed figure, Fleetmaster. The true figure may be higher. We were counting shipyards we could see. It appears they build a great many that we cannot. 206. Not a regional power punching above its weight. Not a soft enemy with one clever ship. Something the Dominion had walked up to in the dark and mistaken for small. The way you mistake the shape of a thing for its size. On the human bridge, the number climbing on the wall had reached 61. Where's the list? Cole asked. The way she asked every watch, and Vega read it back to her. 61, Captain. She nodded. She had a way of nodding at the number that made it clear, to anyone who understood, that the number was not an abstraction. Each one had a name beside it, and Cole knew the names, and now and then, in the quiet stretches between the Kavash trying to kill them, she asked Vega to read a few aloud, and he did, and neither of them explained why. There was one name Cole never asked to have read, because she carried it herself. Ivo Ren was not on the list of the dead. That was the whole trouble with him. Ivo Ren was on the other list, the shorter and worse one, the list of the taken, and Cole kept his face on her board in the corner where the flag officers did not look, an old man of 61 in a gray coat, with dirt under his nails and a stubborn jaw. He had built a seed vault at Halden Reach, out at the quiet rim, 40 years of collecting things that grew, storing them against the day some world would need them back. He had run a children's clinic in the same station because a man who spends his life keeping seeds alive tends to want to keep other things alive too. He had a granddaughter, Mira, 9 years old, who had liked to sit in his greenhouse while he worked and ask him the names of everything, and he had told her every name, patiently, because that was the kind of man he was. The Kavash had come to Halden Reach some months before the Meridian ever crossed their grid. They had not come for the seed vault or the clinic. They had come because Halden Reach was in the way of a supply lane they wanted, and a station full of botanists and doctors was, to the Dominion, a rounding error. They had erased 40 years of work in an afternoon. They had taken the people who ran it, to be sorted and used, or not used as the Dominion saw fit, and they had filed the whole thing under routine, and they had moved on, and they had not thought about it again. Mira Wren had not been on the station that day. She had been on a supply run with her mother, and she was alive, and she was safe, and she asked every single day when her grandfather was coming home. Cole had met the girl once. That was all she would say about it. She had met the girl once, and she had made a decision, and the decision had a ship attached to it now, and a wall full of names, and a number that climbed. On the Kavash deck, Dukov Oro had come to the edge of the thing he did not want to ask, and because he was still a soldier and not yet only a frightened man, he asked it. He opened the channel himself. He would not send an underling. He faced the small bright point on the display that had unmade 9 ships and shrugged off 40, and he spoke into it with as much of his old iron as he could still find. "Human vessel," he said. "You have made your point. You are capable. You are, it seems, not alone. I will ask you plainly, soldier to soldier. How many ships do you have?" There was a pause, long enough that Nethvari thought there would be no answer at all. Then the calm human voice came back, and it did not gloat, and it did not threaten. It gave him one word, and the word was somehow worse than any number could have been. "Enough," Ada Cole said, and that was all. Dukov Oro stood at the rail for a long moment after the channel closed. Enough, not a boast, not a figure he could plan against. A door shut quietly in his face. He had asked how deep the water was, and the answer had been that it did not matter. He would drown either way. Behind him, softly, Nethvari heard the human ship speak once more into the dark, the flat voice reading the next line off a page. 70, it said. Nethvari wrote it under the others. 41, 44, 61, 70. He understood now what he was writing. He had understood since the woman said the name of the station. These were the dead of Halden Reach, counted out one at a time, and each number was not a threat of what the humans would do. It was a receipt for what the Kavash had already done. He looked at the growing column of figures in his own hand, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had no rank for and no orders about. He felt ashamed. He did not know when his own people had done this. He had not been there. But the ship in the dark was counting, patiently, in a language it had bothered to learn so that the Kavash could not pretend not to understand. And Nethvari found that he could not look away from the count, because someone, on the other side of all that silence, had decided that these dead would be spoken aloud until it meant something. He had spent his whole life distrusting the word small. Now he watched the number climb toward whatever total it was reaching for, and he understood that the Dominion had done the one thing his grandmother's death had taught him never to do. It had called a thing small, and moved on, and forgotten it, and the thing had not forgotten them. Duke of Oro decided to end it with everything he had, because a man who has run out of certainty will often reach for scale instead, as if enough force could stand in for understanding. He called in the forward fleet, not a squadron, not a hammer of 40. The whole standing force he had been given for this region, every hull he could reach, more ships than the Dominion had put in one place since the last real war. He arranged them in the old formation, the one carved into the ceiling of the council chamber, the one that had ended civilizations. He would surround the single human vessel with a wall of guns so deep that no adaptation could keep pace, and he would grind it down by sheer number, and he would take the calm out of that woman's voice if it was the last order he ever gave. Nethvari watched the fleet gather on his board, light after light after light, until the display was crowded with the strength of the Dominion, and he watched the one small point at the center of it that had not moved. "They have to see this," Duke of Oro said, almost to himself. "They have to understand now what they are facing." "Fleetmaster," Nethvari said quietly, "I think they always understood." Duke of Oro did not answer. He gave the order to close the ring, and the Meridian, for the first time since it had crossed the grid, was not alone. It happened at the edges of the display, out past the gathered fleet, in the deep dark where the Kavash sensors had nothing to report. First one contact, then a dozen. Then Nethvari stopped counting the way a man stops counting raindrops, because they were not arriving one at a time anymore. They were resolving all at once, a fleet condensing out of the black at the rim of the system, where no fleet had any right to be. Not 40, not 206, 844. Nethvari read the figure off his own board and heard his voice say it aloud and did not recognize the sound. 844 confirmed, Fleetmaster. And he stopped. He checked it. He made himself say it. And the number is still rising. That was the part that broke something in the room. Not the count itself, staggering as it was. The words still rising. Because a fixed number, however large, is a thing a soldier can plan against. He can weigh it, divide it, find its edges. But a number that was still climbing while he watched it was not a fleet. It was a tide. It had no edge to find. Duke of Oro stood at the rail and looked at the tide coming in around his gathered strength, and Nethvari watched the exact moment the truth reached him, because it moved across the Fleetmaster's face like the shadow of something passing overhead. He had thought he was fighting a ship. He had thought, when the ship proved to be more than a ship, that he was fighting a navy, a thing with a size, a thing that could be outmatched if you brought enough guns. He understood now that he had never been fighting a navy at all. The humans had not sent their strength to meet him. They had sent one ship to hold his attention, and behind that ship, out of sight, a whole world had simply kept building. While the Dominion counted the hulls, it could see and called the total reassuring. The humans had gone on turning out ship after ship after ship, faster than the Dominion could destroy them, faster than the Dominion could even count them, and they had not hidden a secret fleet in the dark. They had built one, in the open, at a speed the Kavash had no word for, and then they had brought it here. It was not a weapon he could have prepared for. It was an entire way of being that he had failed to imagine. You could not outshoot a species that made more of everything, faster, and learned your every trick inside a day, and did not tire, and did not stop. There was no formation on any ceiling for that. On the human bridge, Ada Cole watched the same fleet resolve around her ship, and did not smile, because there was nothing to smile about. This was the part she had been carrying since Halden Reach. This was the moment the whole, long, patient approach had been built to reach. "They see it now," Vega said quietly. "They see it." Cole stood at the front of the bridge with her hands loose at her sides, and she looked at the Kavash flagship, small at the center of all that gathered force that no longer meant anything, and she thought about an old man in a gray coat, and a girl who asked every day when he was coming home. "All right," she said. "Start the clock." Vega looked up. It was the first time she had said it since the very beginning, since the ship had crossed the grid and spoken those same 2 words into the dark, and no one on the Kavash deck had understood them. Now the clock meant something. "Aye, Captain," Vega said, and he reached out and did the thing that had been waiting 3 days and 3 names worth of patience to be done, and somewhere on the ship a count that had been running the whole time reached its final stretch. Cole did not raise her voice. She never did. "Read the list," she said. "All of it. Their frequency. I want the last name spoken where they can hear it." Vega turned to the wall, to the column of names one to a line, the wall that Nethvari had been hearing as numbers for 3 days without knowing they were names, and he began to read. He read them slowly. He read them clearly. He read them in the human's own tongue, so that they belonged to the dead and not to the Dominion, and he read them across the Kavash command frequency, so that every officer on that deck heard each one land. On the Kavash flagship, Nethvari listened to the numbers he had been writing down for 3 days' turn, at last, into people. The names came across the command frequency for a long time, because there were a great many of them, and Vega read every one. Nethvari sat at his station and listened, and beside each name, in his own hand, was the number he had written down not knowing what it was. 41 had been a woman named Selahar, a nurse at the clinic. 44 had been a man who ran the water reclamation and had 3 children. 61, 70, all of them, every flat number he had logged into the dark, had a person on the other side of it, and the ship had been telling him that from the first hour, in a language it had learned on purpose, and he had written it all down and not understood until now. By the time Vega reached the end of the list, the Kavash command deck was silent in a way Nethvari had never heard a warship be. Not the silence of discipline, the silence of men who have understood something they cannot put back. The final name landed. Vega let it sit in the air a moment. Then he said the number that came after it, the total the count had been climbing toward for 3 days, and it was the same number as the dead of Halden Reach, exactly, not one more and not one fewer. And then nothing was fired. That was the thing Nethvari would spend the rest of his life trying to explain to people who had not been there. 844 ships and more still arriving, a tide with no edge, every gun in a wall around a single flagship, and a gathered fleet that could not adapt fast enough to matter. The humans could have ended the Kavash forward force in the time it takes to draw a breath. They could have reached past it and ended a Kavash world, and no one in the Dominion could have raised a hand to stop them. They stopped instead. The Meridian moved through the gathered fleet, the way it had moved through the first 9 ships, unhurried, methodical, reaching into hull after hull and switching off the thing that made each one dangerous and leaving everything else alone. Drives went dark, weapons went cold, and the crews, all of them, thousands of them, stayed alive, adrift in ships that could no longer fight, breathing, whole, able to go home. Duke of Oro watched his fleet go dark around him and understood that he had not been defeated. He had been decided about. Someone had looked at everything he was and everything he could do and had judged that none of it was worth killing him over. And there is no wound. A soldier fears more than that one. Then the human voice came onto his deck a final time, calm, level, the voice of the woman who had answered enough, and it was not speaking to the fleet now. It was speaking to him. "Fleet Master," Ada Cole said, "you came to Halden Reach because it was in your way. You erased 40 years of a man's work in an afternoon, and you took the people who did it, and you filed it as routine. You did not spare them. You did not slow down. You did not even remember." She paused. On her own bridge, Nethvari would never know. She was looking at a face in the corner of her board, an old man in a gray coat. "We could do to you exactly what you did to them," Cole went on. "We have the ships. You have seen that we have the ships. We are choosing not to. Your crews are alive. In a little while, your crews will go home to whoever is waiting for them." Her voice did not harden, and that was what made the next words land the way they did. "You chose to kill our doctors. We chose to let your crews go home. Those are not the same choice." The channel closed. Duke of Oro did not move for a long time. He stood at the rail with his hands folded behind him, the way he always stood, above a command pit full of officers who had heard every word, and there was nowhere on the whole deck for him to put his eyes. He had wanted, at the start of all this, to take the calm out of that woman's voice. He understood now that the calm was the point. She had never needed to raise it. People who are certain do not shout, and she had been certain since before his sensors ever found her ship. Certain the way weather is certain, and he had walked his fleet straight into it. Calling it small, Nethvari sat at his station with the column of names in front of him, and he did a thing that no one ordered him to do, and that would have gotten him disciplined on any other day. He took the list he had written, the numbers he had logged into the dark for 3 days, and beside as many of them as he could match, he wrote the names Vega had read. He did not know why he did it. He only knew that someone should keep them on this side too, that the dead of Halden Reach should not exist only on the ship that had bothered to count them, and that if the Dominion was going to be the kind of thing that erased 40 years of a man's work in an afternoon and forgot it, then at least one Kavash officer was going to remember, even if remembering cost him. He finished the list. He set down his pen, and he understood, sitting there among the dark ships and the silence, that he had spent 3 days counting alongside the enemy without knowing it, and that the enemy had let him, because the whole point of counting out loud is that someone on the other side might finally hear. Across the dark, on the human bridge, Vega turned from the wall and let out a breath. "It's done," he said. "Not yet." Cole was watching the Kavash flagship, small and dark at the center of everything. "But the hard part is—" She was quiet a moment. "They'll go back and tell it now. That's what the crews are for. Every one of them is going to carry it home, and they're going to tell it. And it's going to be true because they were here." She turned from the display. "That's how it stops. Not with the ships. With the story the ships send home." On the Kavash deck, Nethvari looked at the small human vessel that had never once been what they thought it was, and he realized that Cole had let them live for the same reason she had counted the dead aloud, so that they would carry it back, so that they would tell it, so that it would not be filed as routine. The news reached the council before the disabled crews did, because bad news always travels faster than the men who carry it, and by the time the High Regent convened the chamber, everyone in it already knew the shape of what had happened, even the ones pretending they did not. Seth Revol took her place at the head of the table, older than most of the worlds under her rule. She had governed for a long time. She had steered the same room through 3 crises that would have unseated a lesser regent, and she had done it with the one tool that had never yet failed her, which was to refuse to be afraid first, and to say so out loud until the room believed her. She opened her mouth to use it now. "A forward fleet has been disabled," she said. "Not destroyed, disabled. The crews are alive and returning. We have suffered a reversal, not a ruin. This remains a The word did not come. She had said it a dozen times in this room across the length of the crisis, easily, the way you say a word, worn smooth by use. This remains a routine matter. It had calmed the ministers every time. But the word would not come out of her now, because everyone at the table had heard, by now, what the count had been. They had heard that a human ship had spoken the names of the dead of Halden Reach across an open command frequency in the Kavash tongue, one at a time, until the number reached the exact number of the people the Dominion had erased in an afternoon, and filed under that very word. Routine. It stopped in her throat. She could not make herself say it, because to say it now in front of them, with the count still ringing in every officer's report, would be to say aloud the thing the humans had built 3 days of silence to make undeniable, that the Dominion had looked at 40 years of a man's work, and the people who did it and called them nothing, that the word had never been a description, it had been a permission. Sethravol closed her mouth. For the first time in her long reign, the High Regent of the Kavash Dominion sat at the head of her own table and had nothing to say. Into that silence, an old man stood up. Lomar the Grey rose slowly, the way he did everything now, and the room did not laugh, because there was no one left in it with the stomach to laugh. He looked around the table, at the soft faces gone gray, at the good silver, at the ceiling painted with the old formation that had ended civilizations and had just been switched off like a lamp. "I told you not to touch that species," he said. He did not say it with triumph. There was no triumph in him. A man who has spent his life being right about disasters does not enjoy the moment the disaster proves him right. "I did not tell you because I am wise. I told you because I read their letters. When one of them dies, the others write to the dead. They keep the names. I said this to you, and you laughed, and I sat down, and I let you laugh, because I am old and tired, and I did not think it would matter whether one more fool believed me." His voice did not rise. "It mattered. I should have made you listen. That is my share of this, and I will carry it. But the rest of it is yours." And here the story must pause, the way a patient voice pauses to explain a thing to someone who has drifted, because what happened to the Kavash Dominion in that chamber is a thing that happens to empires and is almost never understood by the empire it is happening to. Empires do not fall the way trees fall. A tree falls all at once, with a sound, and everyone nearby turns to look. An empire falls the way a man realizes, one quiet morning, that he has already lost. There is no crash. There is only a moment, at a table, in a silence, when the people who run the thing stop believing their own words. And once that belief is gone, it does not come back, and everything after is only the long working out of a defeat that already happened. The Kavash still had worlds. They still had ships, dark now but repairable, and crews, alive now and coming home. On every map that mattered to them, the Dominion was still vast, and it was already over, and the only ones who did not yet know it were the ones who had not been in the room. The humans opened a channel to the council the next day. They did not send a fleet to the capital. They did not need to, and they knew they did not need to, and the not needing was its own kind of message. They sent a single voice, the calm woman's voice, onto the floor of the chamber where the High Regent sat, and they made their terms. The terms were not what the council had braced for. The humans did not ask for territory. They did not ask for tribute, or for ships, or for the ritual surrenders the Kavash themselves demanded of the species they folded into the Dominion. Sethravol had spent the night preparing to bargain over all of those things, because those were the things empires took from one another, and she had no framework for an enemy that wanted none of them. "We want the people of Halden Reach," Ada Cole said. "All of them. Every person your fleet took from that station when you erased it. They were doctors. They were botanists. They kept a seed vault and a clinic, and they were no threat to you. And you took them and filed them, and you have them still, somewhere, sorted into whatever use you found for them. We want them back. Alive. All of them. That is the whole of it." There was a silence on the council floor. "And in exchange?" Sethravol asked, because she had to ask, because a lifetime of governing had taught her that everything has a price, and she needed to know the price so that she could feel safe again. "In exchange, we stop," Cole said. "That is the exchange. You give us back the people you took, and we do not do to your worlds what you did to that station. Your crews are already going home. This is the same offer, larger. You did a thing that can still be partly undone, so undo it, and we will consider the debt paid, and you will not see our ships again." Seth Revol sat with that for a long moment. "You could take anything," she said at last, and it was not quite a question. "You have shown us that you could take anything, and you ask only for the return of a few doctors from a station most of my council could not find on a map." "Yes," Cole said. "Why?" And here the human voice, which had been level through all of it, through the count and the terms and the long patience, did something it had not done before. It answered the question honestly, as if the asking of it were itself the thing that had to be corrected. "Because we do not measure the way you measure," Cole said. "You looked at Halden Reach and you saw its size. We looked at it and we saw its people. You called it routine because it was small, and to you small means it does not count. To us there is no such thing as small. When one of ours dies, we write to them. When one of ours is taken, we go and get them, however long it takes and however far we have to build. You have been trying for 3 days to find the number of our ships, and the number was never the point. A species that writes letters to its dead does not stop until the letters are answered. That is what you failed to understand about us. That is the only thing you needed to understand, and it is the thing you would not learn, and it is why your fleet is dark." The line went out across the chamber, and it went out, in the way of true things, far past the chamber, because the officers who heard it repeated it, and the crews who came home repeated it, and it became, in time, the sentence the Kavash used when they wanted to warn their children away from a certain kind of enemy. A species that writes letters to its dead does not stop until the letters are answered. They did not fully understand it, even as they repeated it, but they had learned to be afraid of it. And for the Dominion, at that point, being afraid of it was enough. The council agreed to the terms. Of course they agreed. There was nothing to agree to, only a thing to accept, and they accepted it the way you accept weather. The people of Halden Reach would be found, in whatever holds and work camps and sordid registries the Dominion had scattered them into, and they would be gathered, and they would be sent home. All of them. Alive. Neth Vari was not in the council chamber for any of this. He was a low signals officer on a flagship, and low signals officers do not attend councils. But he heard it, the way everyone heard it, and he sat in his quarters with the list he had copied out in his own hand, the numbers with the names written beside them, and when the terms came down and he understood that the people behind those names who were still alive were going to be sent home, he found that he was doing a thing he had not done since he was a boy at a table with an empty chair in it. He was writing a name of his own, his grandmother's. He had never written it down anywhere. The Dominion did not keep the names of its small dead, its rounding errors, its routine losses, and so neither had he, because you learn what your people teach you to value. But he had spent 3 days listening to an enemy count her dead one at a time, in a language they had learned so that he could not look away, and he had learned, without deciding to, that a name written down is a different thing from a name forgotten, and he wanted his grandmother to be the first kind. He wrote it. He set down his pen, and out beyond the flagship, small and bright and finally turning away, the human vessel that had never once been what they thought it was began, at last, to go home. It took another month to find them all. The people of Halden Reach had been scattered the way the Dominion scattered everything it took, sorted into holds and workstations and labor registries across a dozen systems, filed under numbers, their names replaced with function. A man who had run a water reclamation plant was listed as maintenance capacity. A nurse was listed as medical throughput. It took a month of Kavash clerks working through their own records, undoing their own bookkeeping, to turn the numbers back into people. And there was a kind of justice in that too, that the empire which had filed them away had to sit and unfile them one at a time. Ivo Ren was among the last to be found, because he had been difficult, and the Dominion had moved him more than once to stop him being difficult. He was 61 years old, and he had spent his captivity doing the only thing he knew how to do, which was to keep things alive. He had talked a guard into letting him tend a scrub of dying plants in a corner of a supply depot, and he had kept them alive. And then he had kept other prisoners alive with what he grew, and he had made himself, in the quiet, stubborn way of such men, more trouble than he was worth. When they finally came to release him, he did not believe it at first. He had stopped believing in release some weeks before, the way a man does, and had decided instead to be useful for as long as he lasted. They flew him home. Home was Halden Reach, or what was left of it, and what was left of it was not much, because the Dominion had erased 40 years of work in an afternoon, and 40 years does not come back in a month. But the humans had been rebuilding the station since the terms were signed, quietly, the way they did everything. And by the time Evo Ren's transport came in, there was a greenhouse standing again, where the old one had been. Not the same one. A new one, plain, functional, with the frame still bright and unweathered. Inside it, on a bench near the door, there was a single plant in a pot. It was one of his, a cutting from the old seed vault, one that had survived in a sample somewhere, coaxed back and grown up in the weeks while they were finding him. Someone had kept it watered. Someone had checked it every day, adjusted the light, turned the pot so it grew straight, done all the small, unglamorous things that keeping a plant alive requires, so that when the old man came home, there would be one living thing waiting that was his. He stood in the doorway of the new greenhouse and looked at it for a long time, and did not say anything, because there was nothing that needed saying, and he was not a man who reached for words when a thing was already plain. Then a girl of 9 came running across the station and did not stop running until she reached him, and Evo Ren knelt down, old knees and all, and held on to his granddaughter, and Mira Ren asked him the same question she had asked every single day since the Dominion took him, only now she was asking it into his coat instead of into the dark. He did not answer it. He did not need to. He was home, and that was the answer. Out beyond all of it, far from the rebuilt station and the greenhouse and the girl, the Meridian was long gone, back among the 206 and the 844 and however many more there were by now, a number no one outside had ever been given, and no one inside had ever bothered to count, because to the people who built them, the ships were never the point. On the bridge that still smelled of cold coffee, on a quiet watch with nothing on the board but freight lanes and a weather buoy that had been drifting off station for a decade, Ada Cole finished the last of it. There was one letter left. It had been on her list since before the campaign began, and she had carried it the way she carried the face in the corner of her board, and now that the man whose granddaughter it concerned was home, she could finish it. She wrote it out by hand, because some things should be done by hand, at the desk beneath the whiteboard with the marker stain that no one had ever cleaned. It was a short letter. It said what such letters say. When she was done, she folded it and set it with the others, and then she reached over to the count that had run through the whole campaign, the number that had climbed in the dark from 41 to the total of the dead, and she stopped it. The clock stopped. It had been running since the first hour, since the ship crossed the grid, and a calm voice said, "Start the clock," into a silence full of officers who did not understand. It had been counting the whole time. Now the last letter was written, and the last of the living were home, and the count had nowhere left to climb, and Cole let it rest. "That's the list," Vega said quietly, from his station. "That's the list," Cole agreed. Neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing triumphant to say. They had not won a war the way the Dominion understood winning. They had gone and gotten their people back, which was the only thing they had ever come to do, and they had made an empire understand a sentence about themselves that the empire would repeat for a generation, without fully understanding it. And now the work was done, and the watch was quiet. Far away, on a Kavash flagship, a low signals officer named Neth Vari came off shift and went to his quarters and took out a list he had copied in his own hand. He read it sometimes, in the evenings, the numbers with the names beside them. He had added his grandmother to it, and then, slowly, over the weeks, he had added others, the small dead of the Dominion that no one had ever written down, the rounding errors, the routine losses. He was not supposed to keep such a list. He kept it anyway, He had learned the habit from an enemy who counted her dead out loud in a language she had learned on purpose, and it had turned out to be the only lesson from the whole campaign that he wanted to keep. He did not know if it would change anything. Empires do not turn on the habits of one low officer. But he thought that maybe it was the kind of small thing that did not stay small if enough people learned it. And he had spent his whole life distrusting the word small, so he wrote the names down, and he kept them. And that was as far as one man could reach. And Ada Cole finished her watch. When it was over, she did the ordinary thing. She got up from the chair beneath the stained whiteboard, and she stretched the stiffness out of her back, and she left the bridge to the next officer coming on, and she went to get something to eat, because she was tired and she was hungry, and the work was done for now. There was no speech. There was no fleet drawn up in formation. There was only a woman going off shift at the end of a long job, the way people do, and somewhere behind her, a clock that had stopped, and somewhere ahead of her, however far, whatever came next. She went back to work the next morning. That was all. She was that kind of person, and so were the people who built the ships, and that, in the end, was the whole of what the Kavash had failed to understand.